Hey there, everyone. I hope you're great. Thank you so much for joining us here on the NBC6 Facebook page and on YouTube. We are streaming live. My name is Roxanne Vargas. We appreciate your time. Always, anytime you're joining us here on NBC6, especially across all of our digital platforms. Again, we have a very important conversation, a very real conversation, one that we've been having for quite some time. And I think we might be having some technical difficulties as we're trying to log on. I'm going to keep talking. This is something that we've all become very familiar with now in a time of COVID, right? Working from home and trying to figure out those technical glitches. With that said, though, I'm going to introduce our special guest today, a household name for sure, a name and a face that so many of us have gotten to know, Dr. Aileen Marty, infectious disease specialist over at FIU, professor as well at Florida International University. Dr. Marty, thanks so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure.
Dr. Marty, we're going to be having, I'm going to say, a fun, fluid, informative conversation today, a subject matter that you have been well acquainted with as you are an infectious disease expert for many, many years. A lot of us had like a, infectious disease 101, back in March. And here we are marking a year of the pandemic arriving here in our country. Has that settled in for you, Dr. Marty, when you saw this thing kind of evolving overseas and making its way here? What does this moment mean for you?
This moment that a year has passed since since people started to really take seriously this horrific pandemic. Well, it's been quite a year. It's been a very trying year. It's been a very sad year. We've lost so many people, more than 500,000 people in the United States alone. So, but my colleagues and so many people in all different types of industries have risen to the occasion and worked diligently to put our arms around this horrific pandemic and get to a much better place, which we are in certain ways. If you look at how many people are becoming ill, being hospitalized, and dying today, it is still far worse than it was 1 year ago. However, it's better than it was in January, and we're heading in the right direction, and we're getting more vaccines in arms, and that's critical.
We've seen, and by the way, for anybody joining us, our conversation live here on Facebook and on YouTube, we certainly invite you to send us any questions that you may have for Dr. Aileen Marty, and some that our viewers have previously sent, which I'll be asking you today. Dr. Marty, you're talking about getting shots in the arms. We have seen in the span of a year places where we used to go to ball games, right, turned into testing sites and now vaccination sites. Places where we used to go play ball with our kids turned into vaccination sites. Yet we're in a place now where you say we're heading in a better direction, but we're in this limbo where some people are waiting for their second dose. Some are fully vaccinated. Others are far from getting their vaccine. Some people don't think that the vaccine is a good idea at all. And there's a sense of relief, hope for sure, but a sense of relief. But you look around the country, some mask mandates have been lifted, like in Texas. Spring break is certainly full swing here. Are you concerned? Does that concern you?
Very much so. It concerns me because we really need to get to that level of immunity in our community where being without a mask is safe. And we're really not there yet. And getting rid of a mask mandate is very symbolic and very bad in reality, because we want to keep the economy open. And what a wonderful way to be able to go out and about and do our business and keep the economy open by reducing that risk using the masks. So I don't understand why they're getting rid of mask mandates. I do understand them, for example, the new changes that the CDC has put out for fully vaccinated individuals. But getting rid of the mask mandate before we have at least 70% and ideally 90% of us with immunity to this virus is premature and is a setup for having more problems with variants.
I'm glad that you went there because we looked at the South Africa variant for quite some time. There's a great deal of concern here about the variant making its way to the United States. I know that the New York and the Brazil variant was detected here in South Florida. So my question to you is, let's say somebody that had the original COVID virus that we've talked about, COVID-19, SARS-2, if this variant, does it provide a situation where this other variant could overcome whatever immunity you might have gotten with that original virus that you already had?
So this is a little bit of a complicated question because there are thousands of variants, but only a few are considered variants of concern. And they become variants of concern because they have gained an ability to do something nasty, something that gives an advantage to the virus and a disadvantage to us. So if we're talking about the UK variant, which is one that is pervasive now in Miami-Dade, really, we have many cases of the UK variant. The original UK variant is more contagious, and there is a lot of evidence that is more likely to produce disease and more likely to cause severe disease. So it's concerning in that way. However, the original, and I keep saying the original UK variant because now there are variations on the UK variant. So the original UK variant, which is the one that we have here, our vaccine is perfectly capable of containing, and people who have made appropriate immunity from having been infected are also protected from that particular original UK variant. Now, unfortunately, some versions of the UK variant right here in the United States have acquired an additional set of mutations that now make it a little bit of an escape variant and reduce the amount of protection from the vaccines and from prior infection. And that leads us to some of the other important variants, like the South African variant, that has a set of mutations on the spike that actually repel the antibodies that some people made to having had infection, and even repel some of the immunity that's gained from the vaccine. Not totally, it's still valuable to have the vaccine, but it's not quite as valuable. And that's why right now we're in the middle of two mini trials of adding a little change to the code for the messenger RNA vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, so that it can capture that problem and lead people to make a really good immunity towards the original strains and towards the South African strain. And I should add that one of the problems with the Brazil strain, it is in common with the problem with the South African. So we're actually overcoming two problems at the same time.
That's certainly a win. Dr. Marty, you're talking about immunity and vaccination. And then there's this question now, once I'm fully vaccinated, how should I behave? And I think I'm going to use the word clarity, relief, when the CDC came out with the guidelines at the beginning of the week, offering us some guidance, right, on how we should behave if we are fully vaccinated 2 weeks after receiving that second dose. Does that vary, though, depending on your age? I'm thinking about seniors, for example, right? They've been the main concern from the get-go. There's so many grandparents that they don't want to just see their kids. We've been doing that with drive-by birthdays. There's so many things that we've missed or seen at a distance, right? When can they come in for that hug?
So here's the thing. What the CDC did is it did a risk analysis to see what is the risk today to, based on the numbers of people who are vaccinated and what their activities, the benefit. So that risk-benefit ratio is looked at. And what we came to a conclusion on is that 2 fully vaccinated couples from different households can resume in a private setting in one of their homes, for example, to have what we would consider normal activities, not wearing a mask, not being physically distanced, etc., because there's virtually no risk to anyone in that particular setting. But let's say you want to hug your grandkids and they have, of course, are not yet vaccinated. So the way that it's looked at is if it's one household that has unvaccinated people and the other household is fully vaccinated people, then again, the risk to the people who are vaccinated is very low to get sick in any way, and certainly no risk of hospitalization and, no risk of death, slight, tiny risk of hospitalization. Whereas and they themselves, because they have the vaccine, have a reduced chance of being an asymptomatic carrier that could infect the other family. So that whole setting, the risk is low enough that it makes sense that they could get together and give their grandkids a hug. And that's just a wonderful thing, assuming, of course, that no one is showing any symptoms and that no one in the other household is a high risk for having serious disease from COVID. And let's not forget that one of the high risk conditions is pregnancy.
I'm glad that you said that, because one of the viewer questions that I got on my Instagram page was about vaccinations and about pregnancy, especially if it's your first child. There's all sorts of things that you're trying to figure out and that you don't know, and then you throw this into it. And there was a question here from Roxy8609 on my Instagram that asked, should I get the vaccine if I'm planning on getting pregnant? And she went on to ask about vaccination and infertility, if there's a correlation on that.
So there is absolutely no correlation between vaccination and infertility. That's one of those things that, unfortunately, it's one of those big lies that has been put out there, and it frightens people. But none of the vaccines in any way affects anyone's fertility. And in terms of pregnant women, we now have tens of thousands of pregnant women who have received the vaccines. And there's no noticeable effect on the mothers or the child, to the point that my own pregnant daughter asked me if she should get the vaccine, and I said 100%, and she did. And she's doing fabulously, as is my upcoming granddaughter.
Thank God, and congratulations, right? That's the best news, expanding the family, health and safety. That's the most important thing. Dr. Marty, can we talk about herd immunity? That's a term that is thrown around. And if you can explain in lay terms what herd immunity is, are we anywhere near getting to herd immunity now that we've had a lot of people that have, had the virus already and more shots getting into the arms of individuals?
So let me just start by saying that one of my areas of great interest is comparative medicine. So I've been very interested in the veterinary world for a long time. And that term, herd, as you can imagine, came from the veterinary community when the initial uses of vaccines became very obvious to protect the herd. So the original concept was to get to a level of protection from a horrible pathogen, so that even if not every member of the herd was given a vaccine or had the case, there was no room, there was no easy way for the virus or the bacterium or whatever to affect any member of the herd. So that's what we want. And then what is that percent that we need to achieve for herd immunity? It's going to be different for different types of infections. So what we do is we figure out how contagious and how rapidly something spreads from one person to another. We look at that basic reproductive number, and we use that to assess exactly, little complicated mathematical formula, what percent of the population has to have immunity in order to protect all members of the population. And prior to the development of these escape mutants from SARS-2, we estimated that somewhere around 70 to 75% was enough for immunity. But now that we have these escape mutants, we realize that we really need to get closer to 90% of us having protection from this virus to protect all of us and to really allow us to have normal living. Now, you may ask about herd immunity acquired naturally, right, by having had the infection. And one of the interesting things about coronaviruses, not just the SARS-2 virus, is that they don't tend to facilitate the making of good, long-lasting immunity. And one of the reasons for that is how the spike enters the cells. It actually changes shape and is very flexible. And so the body is trying to attack the virus before the virus gets in, and the thing it needs to attack keeps changing shape. But what we've done with these vaccines, and all three of the currently available vaccines have this change, is that we added kind of a stiffener to the hinge on the spike, so it stays fixed in a particular shape. That's the best shape for making the best antibodies to keep the virus from causing disease. And that's why the immunity that people get from the vaccine is better quality. You get better quality T cells and better quality B cells, and the B cells are the ones that produce the antibodies, than you would from a natural infection. And it's more likely to last for a longer period of time.
And that leads me to one of our viewer questions. And again, if you are all joining us here on the NBC6 Facebook and YouTube pages, we thank you so much for joining this live conversation here with Dr. Aileen Marty. Dr. Marty, this question comes from Andrea Baldion, who asks, if you are vaccinated, can you still get the virus and pass it around?
So that is a phenomenally important question, which was not initially addressed in any of the clinical trials. Retrospectively, we now know what's going on, and some new tests have given us some answers to that question. So, of course, the virus can get into your body, just whether or not you have a vaccine. The problem for the virus is, can it get into your cells and reproduce to levels that you can infect someone else, whether or not you have symptoms? So let me make that a little simpler. We're not wearing a magic shield, right, when we have a vaccine. So anything can get in. It's a matter of, can our defenders, can our soldiers, can our white blood cells, our B cells, and our T cells, and our natural killer cells, and our neutrophils, and everything else confront this thing before we even realize that it entered our bodies? And that's really important. So to get down to your question, can you get the virus in your body? Absolutely. Can it grow and get to a level that you can infect others? Well, unfortunately, yes, it can, but it has a much harder time doing so if you're fully vaccinated. And because it has a much harder time doing that, if you're fully vaccinated, the risk of you being an asymptomatic carrier has dropped by 70%. So you are much less likely to be an asymptomatic carrier if you're fully vaccinated, but it's not zero.
And that's never going to be the case, as you said, right? We're not walking around with a magic shield. You know, this though gives us that chance. I love that you say our soldiers are white blood cells. That's how I talk to my kids about it. You know, that's why I give them their little emergency, like little gummies, their emergency vitamin C packets every day, because we got to help the soldiers in your antibody, you know, fight off. And I'm just talking about the sniffles. I'm not even talking about COVID here, you know, but it's important to just take care of ourselves across the board. There's another question here from, I might not pronounce your name correctly, so I apologize. Kem Vidget Silic, thank you so much for your question, who asks, which vaccine is the most effective? We have obviously Moderna, Pfizer, and now Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Marty?
So it depends on what type of efficacy you're looking at. For the population, as opposed to you as an individual, for the population, we want a level of efficacy that keeps you out of the hospital and you don't die, right? So they're all able to do that very, very well. No question that any of the three available EUAs will keep you out of the hospital, and all of them will prevent you from dying. So in that way, that's great. You as an individual, however, you might be wanting to look at which one is most likely to protect me from having any symptoms of COVID or even having long hauler disease. Now, in that case, you have to look at the trials, and the clinical trials show that the messenger RNA vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, are going to give you a 94 to 95% protection from manifesting any symptoms whatsoever. The J&J vaccine had variable levels of preventing any symptoms whatsoever, depending on where the trial was done. So it did worst in South Africa, where they have so much of that South African variant, and it did best in the United States. So in the United States, at the time, we had much fewer variants, and so our overall efficacy at preventing any symptoms whatsoever with the J&J was around 73%. So that's where you are for any symptoms whatsoever. But the J&J did provide 85 to 88% protection from serious disease and 100% protection from dying, just like the Moderna and the Pfizer. And the Moderna and the Pfizer, again, to be very clear, provide upwards of 99% protection from severe disease and 100% protection from dying.
Dr. Marty, I'll ask an extended question there. We've been covering all, long lines, right? Miami-Dade College campus, people just waiting for their shot to get their shot, right? When you look at, the seniors in our community, anybody with pre-existing conditions with these options of these 3 vaccines now, is it your take that somebody that is in that category where they're, older in age, whatnot, to make sure that they wait for the 2-dose vaccine option as opposed to the J&J?
Well, again, right now, the J&J is being given as a 1-shot vaccine to get the community up to that level where it's going to prevent hospitalization and death. But even today, the J&J, the company, the Johnson & Johnson and Janssen are in the middle of a trial of giving it as a 2-dose vaccine. And to be very, very clear, the replication deficient, so in other words, it's not able to replicate adenovirus that carries the spike, that modified hardened spike on the J&J, is effective at 85% rate from getting you to be hospitalized or sick enough to be hospitalized. It's really important.
People launched 2 temporary COVID-19 vaccination sites, one in Miami Springs, even North.
But of course, you have to realize that if you were to take a booster of the Johnson & Johnson, then that efficacy is likely to go up. In fact, it probably will go up for the J&J vaccine. And you can always take the J&J now, and eventually you'll be able to take a booster dose of the J&J. What they're looking at is to make sure that there's no safety factor by taking 2 J&J, and that's what we're waiting for. And it's going to take a few months before we know that. And again, to be very, very clear, that adenovirus 26 that's on the J&J is also on the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik 5. But the Russians are giving the booster 21 days later with an A5.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very interesting. There's another vaccine question here from one of our viewers. And by the way, if you're just joining us here live on Facebook and on YouTube here with NBC6, send us your questions. We're going to try to get as many of them in. This one's interesting. It comes from Beatrice Olavarria, who says, my husband is getting the vaccine, but I'm not eligible yet. What safety guidelines should we be following?
So you are essentially one household. You've been together. I think is reasonable for a prolonged period of time. Your husband is now going to have a very high level of protection. You're not going to be getting anything. Very unlikely he would transmit anything to you. You simply have to follow the same guidelines right now until we have more of our population up to herd immunity.
Hubby coming in for the win there. There you go.
And let you know, not to worry. I mean, the Biden administration just purchased another 100 million doses of the J&J vaccine. That means another 100 million Americans are going to get vaccinated, have the opportunity to get vaccinated. So vaccine will be available for you very, very soon.
Dr. Marty, when the Biden administration, when President Biden came out and pushed up the deadline of having the country, I'll say access to vaccines by 2 months. What was your take on that?
Well, I think that first of all, we were looking at the real numbers. We were looking at, you need the vaccine doses fundamentally, and you need the syringes, and you need the whole wherewithal to do it right and safely for every individual, and you need people like me to give you the vaccine. So once we realized that we had enough and there were ways in, if we could just have more of the vaccine and the syringes to get this into arms, then very reasonably, the president said we can get this done sooner, and we can. And I think that here in South Florida, we have to absolutely get teachers of all ages vaccinated. Because having the schools fully open and safe is critical. And we have to get the tourist industry, we have to get the hospitality industry vaccinated, because they're right up front and personal with individuals who might be bringing new variants to our community. So by protecting them, not only are we protecting these vital individuals, we're also protecting the entire community.
That was going to be my next question to you. Obviously, the governor said, let's get teachers in line next for those vaccines. Do you believe that hospitality, they should be next in line for priority to get their vaccinations?
We need all frontline workers, but particularly frontline workers who are likely to encounter tourists. Because remember, we have this New York variant, which, by the way, is also more than one New York variant, and some of them are very serious. So even if they're coming from a domestic site, we need our industry that is upfront and personal with these tourists to be fully vaccinated. So our busboys, our waiters, our hotel people, our bellboys, all these people need that vaccine as soon as we can get it to them.
Dr. Marty, what's your take on schools opening up next school year for in-person learning? Superintendent Runcie in Broward County said that that's his hope for the upcoming school year. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that in general, and especially for the younger grades, there is no substitute for in-person brick and mortar teaching. And if we can get back to that, because we've established an incredible level of herd immunity that's really protecting us, I think it's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, I will say that because we had to adapt to what was going on, and we're so fortunate to have these amazing technological tools that we are able to have, for example, at the university, some of the smaller classes do particularly well on Zoom because we have a much more interactive, I see every face every time when we're talking. And so I think what we need to do is figure out where it makes sense and where it doesn't make sense to have the different types of learning.
And a lot of that is on a case-by-case basis. I was previously, before we went on live with everybody, I was talking to you about my two boys. They started virtual, they're back in person, and these kids are just grateful to be in person, and they follow the rules. They follow the rules. They wear their mask, they keep their distance. And if they don't, my kids in particular will give you an eye, they'll call you out. But there are some cases where there's I know, even speaking in our class in my community, there's some kids that have, previous heart conditions. So is it a case-by-case basis, right? Where maybe parents are going to hold on a little bit longer before making, even though, let's say, hopefully we do reach herd immunity, we get to that 90%, for parents to hold back a little bit more in those type of cases?
Absolutely. I mean, you absolutely have to look at the individual's circumstances and their risk-benefit ratio from being in the classroom. That's a critical component.
We have a question here, Dr. Marty, from Wendy Gonzalez, who asks, or who says rather, I'm working on a COVID unit in South Florida. The patients seem to be getting sicker again than a few months ago. Are there trends with current mutations getting stronger?
So she's absolutely right. We are seeing some more severe disease, particularly in people who we've been able to document have the variant, because again, these variants, they attach better to the cells of our body, and so you get more virus per cell. And I am also aware of individuals who, because the second time around they got a variant, are more ill than they were the first time around and are having to be hospitalized. And that's why we've got to get vaccines in arms as quick as possible. And that's also why we need to particularly look at frontline people and make sure that they are fully vaccinated. And that, of course, includes the teachers and all staff in schools.
And all. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Marty, earlier you used the term long haulers. That's something that we've heard coming in and out through this whole thing. Can you explain what exactly happens there, that there are patients who months now just can't kick this thing?
Yeah, this is a really sad aspect, and it's something that we have known is a complication of SARS viruses. In fact, back in the 2003-2004 SARS outbreak, up to 30 to 40% of people who were victims of that SARS virus ended up with long haul syndromes that lasted 3.5 to 4 years. And for some individuals, the complications of having had the disease are lifelong. And one of the really challenging aspects of it is that even people who had no symptoms initially, or had very mild symptoms initially, can still end up being long haulers. Now, the good news is that a recent study in Nature shows that you're more likely to become a long hauler if you have 5 or more symptoms initially, right? And so that is good for that part of the population that had fewer symptoms. But these symptoms range from cardiac complications, kidney problems, pulmonary problems, and neurologic problems that are particularly grave in some individuals. Not to mention the less serious things such as hair loss and COVID toes and things of that nature, which are they're certainly psychologically impacting, but not as serious to one's health.
There's a question that came in via Instagram from Cataleon80, who asks, how long do the antibodies last after you get the second dose of the vaccine?
Well, that's the $1 million question, because we don't know, since the time has not passed. What we're doing is we're doing surrogate studies to try and get some concept of that. And from what we're looking at, and these are not easy studies to do, because we're actually trying to identify memory cells and get some idea of how long they're going to live. And the current studies are suggesting that the memory cells may last as much as 2 years. And that's really good news if that turns out to be true. But the reality is we've only been working with trying to even solve these riddles since last January. And so the time hasn't passed where we know for how long the average person's protection is going to last. On the flip side, we do know that other coronaviruses that are naturally acquired, not vaccine, naturally acquired, the immunity rarely lasts more than a year or two. So we don't think that natural immunity from COVID is going, from having the SARS-2 virus, is going to give you long-term immunity. However, these vaccines, remember, they have these modified spikes that are delivering an information to your immune system that's instructing your immune system to make more powerful, better memory cells that should last longer. But does that mean that you're only going to get a vaccine once every couple of years? Well, that would be true if we all behaved and really took this thing seriously right now, so that will be true. The problem is, if there are variants, and there are already variants that we're already having to modify the vaccine to, then you're going to have to get a new vaccine to cover the new variant. So the better that we behave to prevent the origin of more variants, the less likely it is that we'll have to have lots and lots of vaccinations.
The message you keep going back to, Dr. Marty, is, this a very long time ago, was not about the I, it's about the we, it's about the collective, and making sure that we are keeping our distance still. And when it's safe to do so, then, everybody's fully vaccinated, go in and have that hug. But in the meantime, we still got to make sure that we're keeping our distance. Going back to the vaccine here, this question's from Lisette M19, who asks about our children. Is the vaccine safe for children, and from what age?
So right now, the Pfizer is approved for children 16 to 18. And many individuals 16 to 18 have now taken the Pfizer with equivalent results to adults who have taken the Pfizer vaccine, which is excellent. In terms of younger children, right this minute, as we speak, all three of the vaccine companies are doing studies on children. And the way that the studies are being done is we're taking an older cadre of people first, right? So generally these are above the age of 14 to 18, and then at a lower dose of vaccine being given to them based on their weight. And then we'll go to younger ages until we get to the youngest possible age. But there are wonderful families that are volunteering to be individuals who either get placebo or a vaccine dose so that we can see the effects of the vaccine, and we'll all know when children of any age can receive the vaccine and at what dose.
Dr. Marty, you've said, the part of the foundation of this conversation is you've been speaking to the importance and really the science here, and it is what it is. The importance of making sure that we're vaccinated and keeping all of us healthy as a community, right? As a race, as a human race. But fact of the matter is that it's been tough to get to the vaccine to certain communities, and there is a concern based on historical concern, based on vaccines and demographics that just don't believe in the importance of vaccination. And I think that having lived through this global pandemic and seen the numbers, the numbers of infection, of hospitalizations, and of deaths. And, we talk about numbers, but these are people, these are individuals, these are fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, right? So can you speak to that community that's still not sold on vaccinations, on this vaccine, and even the mRNA, when you talk about going in there and tweaking, and, there's a lot of concern about the science and what exactly this does to your body?
So those are very serious questions that I think really people need to understand how these vaccines work. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that even though the hype was that this was all done in a year, that's just not true. It's not even close to being true. We've been trying to develop messenger RNA vaccines since the late 1980s. And it took a long time to figure out how to stabilize the messenger RNA, how to put it into the lipid nanoparticle, how to construct these lipid nanoparticles so that they enter our cells and are safe. And in fact, remember when I talked about stiffening? Well, the patent for that came out in 2017, long before anybody had ever heard of SARS-CoV-2 or any of these horrific aspects of this particular pandemic. The reason that was patented back in 2017 was because researchers were trying to make a good, safe RNA vaccine against a kissing cousin of this SARS virus called Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And so they had already modified the spike, and really it was just a matter of knowing the sequence, the genetic code of the spike for the SARS-2 virus, which the Chinese kindly gave us in early January. By January 9th, folks at the National Institutes of Health were already using the information that China had provided the world to create the first messenger RNA vaccines against the SARS-2 virus. But it was based on technology that had taken years to do. Years and years and years to do. So what is it that this messenger RNA, so let's talk about those first, and then I'll talk about the J&J because that's a different technology. What is it this messenger RNA does when it gets into your cells? Well, as soon as it comes in, it goes into certain organelles in your body, and it is recognized as messenger RNA, which is a normal product that is in our bodies every day, and it goes in the central dogma, as we say, of molecular biology is DNA becomes RNA and then is translated into protein. And that's the passageway. It goes in that direction. So I've heard misinformation about, oh, that RNA is going to get into your chromosomes. Well, it doesn't go backwards like that. The only way it could go backwards is if you had a retrovirus like HIV and it were in poor control. And that's not the case for most individuals in the United States. Even people who have HIV, they're under treatment, they're getting appropriate treatment, and so they don't have anything that could turn that RNA backwards into DNA. So what's it going to do? It's simply going to read the messenger RNA, and it goes through a process where it turns that information into the protein. And one of the beautiful things that happens in our cells is that it then sugar coats it, because those proteins are naturally sugar coated. So it's like putting icing on the cake. And that icing that's made that way through a messenger RNA vaccine is the same icing that would happen if the wild virus had infected you. So what your immune system sees is a beautifully decorated cake, if you will, of this spike with all the right shapes and in that stiff position, so that your body makes the absolute perfect T cells and B cells to confront that horrible virus. Now, the other vaccine, the J&J, uses an older technology. It's not really that old. In fact, Nancy Sullivan, back in the early 2000s, developed this technique for making these types of vaccines in order to fight Ebola. And in fact, we have Merck has a licensed vaccine for Ebola that uses that technology. What it is here is you take a different virus that's not a serious virus, that doesn't cause serious illness, and you add to that virus this thing that we want our immune system to see, this spike. And in the case of J&J, it's a spike that's been stiffened. So now you get this other virus into your system. And by the way, they made it so that the other virus is dead. It's not capable of reproducing. So it's not going to spread either. But it does have many different things that your immune system sees. One of them is that spike. One of the slight differences then is that unlike the messenger RNA vaccines, with these vector vaccines, you don't necessarily get the same decorations. You don't get the same icing on the cake. So it does look a little bit different to the immune system than when the spike is made in your cell by messenger RNA.
I'll tell you, the technology and the science is just incredible. Dr. Marty, we're going to start wrapping up here soon, but I do want to ask you one final question, your final take. We started talking about this, and I want to end with this. Just asking you on your take on the current trends. I know that you look at trends. There is an overall sense of relief right now that we're seeing a lot of people get those shots. So what's your take on the current trend? And there's the, are we out of the woods question yet? I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but where do you see us moving forward?
Well, first of all, I think everyone needs to be very clear that in South Florida, we are worse today than we were in September. So we are definitely not out of the woods. And we have these variants in circulation that can cause problems, but we are better than we were in January, and we are moving in the right direction. And the faster that we can get vaccine in arms, the better off we're going to be as a community, because our level of protection is really rising. And remember, herd immunity is not an on-off switch. It's more like a dimmer. So the further we get along, the better all of us are in terms of protection and in terms of getting back to normal.
So bottom line is try to get your vaccine as soon as you can. Wear the masks, keep your distance, keep following the rules. And Dr. Aileen Marty, I got to tell you, we're just so grateful on behalf of the community, the country, just for your time today, for your time and for your services, great country as well, and for breaking it down for us today. We really appreciate it. Dr. Aileen Marty, infectious disease specialist and professor at Florida International University, my alma mater. Go Panthers. So I'll throw that up as well. We appreciate your time, Dr. Aileen Marty. And again, for all of our viewers as well, watching us here live on Facebook, watching us live on YouTube, we thank you for your time, for your questions, for your viewership here on our digital platforms, and certainly on the air as well. You can get the very latest information, watch this conversation back, and we constantly are keeping you connected with information you need to know on our NBC6 app and on NBC6.com. Just go ahead and search coronavirus pandemic for the very latest. Dr. Aileen Marty, again, we thank you so much for your time and for your expertise as always.
Pleasure.